Welcome, Chris, and thank you so very much for I would say now maybe 6 years. I don't know the exact number, but it feels like at least 6 years, somewhere in that ballpark, meeting with the students to share a little bit about mindfulness, law, life, judging.
I'm interested in your questions. I will just a little introduction. I'd say since for about 10 years, I've had a mindfulness practice. And when I say I have a practice, it doesn't mean I'm always sitting down and meditating as much as I want to. It's very up and down for me. Right now, I'm probably, what I can count on is I'm really enjoying my Waking Up app. Sam Harris offers this app, and there are these 10-minute meditations. And I at least, like right before this, I did a 10-minute Sam Harris guided meditation. And then I'll get little breaks during the day where I'll just stop and say, okay, just a few minutes to stop and kind of focus on my breath and come back to my body. But I found that in the beginning that wasn't a natural place to go, and over the years it's become very accessible to me to do that. And I read. There are teachers of meditation. I'm interested in Buddhist teachings at a very secular level, but since a lot of this meditation concepts that we follow kind of arose from that lineage, I'm interested. And so there are writers like Tara Brach and Pema Chodron and Jack Kornfield and others like Sylvia Boorstein, whose article you have, who really talk about, teach about meditation, but put it in a bigger context about how we live our lives, trying to live this life we've been given with as much presence and ease as we can have. So I go to readings like that, and there's so much content. And now I keep getting all these emails with these amazing free guided online meditations, which I have no time to do, it feels like, because I feel like I'm working harder staying put than I have when I go to work. I'm working completely from home. My dining table is my chambers now, and it's my courtroom. I'm having hearings telephonically. I was swearing out agents for search warrants by FaceTime, doing all sorts of things that we'd never done before. And it feels like the days, a lot of times I wonder what day is it. Now I do Pilates by Zoom Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it helps me know what day it is. And I'm trying to make weekends and weekdays different, but they kind of merge. I find that I'm busier than I ever was and accomplishing less than I ever did, is the way it feels. So, what a time to have a practice to just try to come back to the moment. And the truth is, when I come back to the moment, I can access a lot of beauty. I can access a lot of gratitude. Just turn on the TV for a flash, right? And then I can, instead of being focused on, it took me 10 rounds to get this search warrant done, with phone calls, with emails, with losing a connection. I can think, wait a minute, I have the privilege of doing this work. And all those physicians and nurses are taking care of everybody else, right? Just in a flash, I'm feeling so fortunate in a flash. So it's a funny balance between like being present in just my present body and moment and existence, and then checking in with outside, somewhat imagined world, because I'm not in those hospitals. I have to imagine, right? I'm not at the food bank line, but I can imagine. And so for me, it's a funny thing of kind of going outside with fantasy, knowing that it is to bring me back to the present. And gratitude is part of this practice too. It's hard to be angry and it's hard to be upset when we're feeling gratitude. I don't think you can. There's something about the brain. It doesn't. The gratitude channel's open. The other ones are shut down. So that's how I'm living right now. And I'm always so touched and so impressed that you are at the point you are in your lives with this interest and this study. If only, I think, I had done this when I was a law student, my life would have been on a different course. I mean, the course may not have been hugely different, but at least by some significant degrees, it would be different, would have been different. And I would have been, and it would have been better in my view. So I really salute you for your curiosity about this. And so I'd like to answer any questions or hear any comments.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that, an event or something specific that triggered you to start looking to mindfulness, or is it something that you happened upon?
That's a good question, and so I came to this when I was in a crisis in my life. I was going through a divorce, and there were affiliated other troubles that were attached to that. And I think it's quite common. That's why I'm so impressed that you do this. I mean, maybe you all feel you have your own personal crisis. I certainly hope not. But I think many people come to a practice like this when they're in a very difficult time. And in that period of time, I was just mightily resisting the present moment. I didn't want any present moment. And I had this, loop of thought in my head about how wrong this was and a lot of self-blame and et cetera, et cetera. And it was all pretty miserable. And it just went on and on and on. And it didn't make anything better. And I thought, somehow I got to get out of this. So instead of resisting the present moment, and talking to friends, I thought, oh, I have to learn how to be with the present moment without resisting it, because it's here. It's just here. And so I took the mindfulness-based stress reduction course, MBSR, which is taught around the world. It was created by John Kabat-Zinn, which is, again, another one of those really good writers about mindfulness and also more broadly, a context to put it in. And it's an 8-week course, and it's really very, very good. And I just practiced being with that loop of thought, being in this body that one didn't want to be there, being with all the discomfort. And it took a lot of practicing, but slowly there was relief. And so one of the great lessons to me in this is, and this is also kind of a basic notion, is that, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. The notion being that things will happen in our lives. Look at the pandemic, right? That we're not in control of. It happens. And it's our relationship to the circumstance that defines our experience. So in my instance back then, and certainly even now, it was, am I going to have a loop of thought about how unfair, unjust, regretful, blah, 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 I feel about this circumstance, or am I just going to kind of relax into it and be with it? The latter is so much more acceptable. And it's all that resisting, that aversion or grasping, holding on that we do in life all the time. We're always trying to negotiate, right, how we want our life to go. I want, okay, no more pandemic, back to, what or that it's that resisting and grasping. I want to hold on to this that I love, and I want to stop what I don't like. That's so much energy, and it's so much suffering. And so this mindfulness practice gives an opportunity to notice the habitual ways that we do it over and over again that are kind of like wallpaper and we don't see them. And so that was the great lesson for me. And let me say this, it is a moment to moment practice. I used to think if I practiced hard enough, I'd end up on the mountaintop, right? Everything would be peaceful. I've got this. And my life would just, like I'd be like on a magic carpet. It's not that. It's like a moment to moment coming home, to that awareness. So that's how I got in, and then it just stuck with me. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir. Tyler.
Was it something where, I don't know what point you were at in your career when you started with mindfulness, but was it something that you instantly saw how it could connect to your work? Was it something you had to introduce to it? Did you have some sort of experience where you realized mindfulness practice can spill over and benefit what you do in your career?
That's a great question. Maybe you've heard of the book by John Kabat-Zinn called Wherever You Go, There You Are. Great title. Right, so where I went to work before and will again is to a courthouse. And so that's where I spend so much of my life, in my chambers, in a courtroom. And so what's that experience going to be like for me? Am I going to resist what's hard? Try to be busy holding on to having things the way I want them when they don't go that way? Or again, can I relax into what is? And guess what? Best I can tell, I'm a much more enjoyable person to be around when I do the latter. And I'm more, I think I'm more on it for my job. So, courtroom's a great example. I think I mentioned that little article that Scott included, but think of all the things going on in a courtroom. It's a big challenge for a lawyer. You're in a trial. You've got the witness you're questioning, your opposing counsel's objecting. Let's throw in an interpreter, right? Who's you're simultaneously interpreting. Let's throw in a court reporter who's looking like you're talking way too fast. Let's throw in a juror number 8 who's dozing, right? And then people in the gallery behind you who are making noise and distracting you, and a judge who's looking aggravated, and you're supposed to hold all of that in your attention. I mean, I'm supposed to do the same thing as a judge. So if in that scenario, I'm busy thinking, I'm really hungry. What should I have for lunch today? I mean, you name it, the places our minds go. Or if I'm finding somebody hard to understand, their argument's not making any sense to me. That happens to me a lot, and I'm aggravated either with myself. Why didn't I read that case? I knew I should have read that Supreme Court decision before this hearing. Or I'm aggravated with them. Why didn't they read the case? So then I'm having that whole loop of thought. Well, if I'm doing that, I'm not really hearing your argument very well. So it just becomes really obvious. And I think you could take my example to any place any of us go, with your family at night. It's endless.
Chris, might you speak to how it is that when you are on the bench and you have all that stuff going on, let's say, pick any of those circumstances, but let's say the counsel who's speaking to you not being as prepared, or whatever the situation may be, how it is that you might bring some of the practice or insights of practice to steady or recalibrate or more fully be present, or whatever it is that might be pertinent to you, so we could get a little bit of at least a taste of it in action in whatever way at this moment that may pop up for you as being responsive.
Well, one of the real surprises to me in learning about meditation was how important the body is. I thought it was all about this, that head that wouldn't stop with all the looping thoughts that I didn't like and made me miserable. And really, it was really a lot below the neck. And so a lot of the practice is, for me, that works a lot, is focusing on embodiment. Just really in meditating, just being physically present, just noticing that, you know, sometimes there's a guided body scan that brings you from head to toe. You know, you can just do it with the breath, and there's so much to feel there with the breath, so endlessly changing. And I didn't get it for a long time. Like, why are you asking me to pay attention to my body? It's my head that's bothering me. But first of all, it's very grounding. It's very grounding to be in the body. And it's also very interesting when the loop of thought is going, where the sensations are in the body, and becoming very familiar with them. So taking it back to my courtroom example, I've had times when, you know, I'm engaged with an oral argument with lawyers and I'm really frustrated and I don't understand it, or I think they're, you know, perhaps I think that I have other problems with how they're speaking to me or what they're saying. And I'll start feeling, first of all, I feel that my jaw gets very tight. I'll find my hands are kind of clasped and my whole body is hot. And for me, that's associated, first I think it's anger, but underneath it is anxiety. And the anxiety is, oh man, you know, I scheduled an hour for this hearing. We got 10 minutes left and I still don't even know what the answer is. And, you know, I'll never figure this one out. I'll start to think that, right? Oh, I'll never figure this one out. And I've got that big other case I've got to get ready for at 2 o'clock today. So how am I going to do that? And underneath my frustration with the lawyer is that worry and anxiety. And anxiety for me is I get hot, my jaw gets tight, my hands get clenched. So that becomes like an early warning, right? When my voice is rising with the lawyer and I don't like that, that's not how I want to show up to work. Sometimes I can have that awareness that, oh, you're just worried. I'm just worried about this. Let's this, and then I have something to say to myself. I've been here 1,000 times. I'll figure it out. It will get done. I can move the 2 o'clock hearing to 2:30. There's solutions. And so that body connection is something I find useful. And that really came all out of the mindfulness practice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you like when you're in court and if you were to see an attorney who like typically does things that infuriate other people just in the manner in which he or she runs the practice, or like the way they carry themselves, maybe the way they deal with other attorneys, and when you're in the courtroom and you might see a, a witness or like a plaintiff or a defendant who you might have a feeling is maybe like hiding something, or like, you know, your gut instinct says something's wrong. How do you use mindfulness to just carry on and not let those feelings you know, get in the way of how you'd otherwise judge the situation?
I think, again, it's the loop of thought that I'm having, the judgment about that, and the agitation or anxiety, depending on, you know, what words apply, the feeling underneath it. And just kind of being aware of that. You know, sometimes what's behind that is a decision I have to make. Do I leave do I address that behavior, right? And then how do I address the behavior in a way that feels appropriate and fitting for a judge, right? We're not supposed to be jerks. We're supposed to have patience and wisdom and, you know, treat people well, but also enforce the rules of the court. So I guess it's just like anything else in life. I don't always hit the target. You know, sometimes I say things that afterwards I think, oh, I kind of wish I hadn't put it that way. But that having a practice just makes it a little bit more possible that I can be aware of the different thoughts going on and have a little more space to consider my reaction without, say, impulsively or thoughtlessly reacting. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Stephanie, had you had something? Somebody had raised their hand a moment ago.
Yeah, I have a question regarding mindfulness and your own like self-care and kindness. You had mentioned how during this time it's kind of hard to finish all the work, and I'm sure a lot of us are feeling that way, and it's hard not to be frustrated and disappointed with yourself. So how have you used mindfulness as a tool for self-care and kindness, like during these stressful times?
Well, that's a great question, and this is absolutely a practice of compassion and kindness, because the guidance is to observe without judgment. So when we're sitting and meditating, we are observing, and if there's a feeling of like or don't like, observing that, but not being carried away by it as truth. There's a little third-party distancing, right? Kind of being a witness to yourself and a practicing of that. And seeing our likes and our dislikes, seeing where we miss the mark, noticing the judgment that we have for ourselves, which can be so harsh. And it's become, I didn't really understand this until I started this practice, that if I can't be kind to myself, I can't be kind to others. Putting it differently, the only way to readily access kindness and compassion for others is to be able to do the same for myself. And sometimes that's a bigger motivator for me. I don't want to be that person who is unkind to someone else. Now, it's funny, I should start with, I want to be kind to myself, and I do. But sometimes that's easier said than done. But I think you're touching upon something that is really essential to the practice. It's a practice of self-compassion over and over again, and then extending it to others. Did that answer your question?
I also had a question, if there's time for it.
Sure.
My question was more about using mindfulness as almost a compartmentalizing tool between your professional and personal life. Do you use mindfulness to leave a highly stressful workday at work, or vice versa, leaving a highly stressful personal situation at home when you enter work?
Well, I think that's a good application of it. Again, you're trying to be present. So if you're at work, you're at work. If you're at home, you're at home. And of course, our minds travel back and forth. We time travel. I love that star over your head, by the way. It's very cool. It's great. It's a nice circle.
Most people think I'm from Texas whenever they see it. I'm not. I'm a Floridian.
But yeah, so I think that's an example of the practice of trying to be present. Yeah.
I had kind of a follow-up question for that.
Mm-hmm.
How has mindfulness kind of helped you remain unbiased in your decision making?
How has it helped me remain unbiased? Well, an interesting subject that people talk about a lot now and study and have linked it to mindfulness is this notion of implicit bias. And it's just fascinating how the brain works. Our brain is pretty efficient and orders our life in a way that we implicitly, without noticing, attach certain assumptions, right, to people, to circumstances. And I often think that the practice is one of noticing my assumptions and catching them. And to me, I'll sometimes with my law clerks, something will come up and I'll say something, I'll walk away and I'll come back and I'll say, wait a minute, I just made an assumption. I'm going to try to catch all my assumptions today. And they're endless. They're just rolling out constantly. So the same would be true, you know, there's just a whole drop-down menu of assumptions that we have when we see people. So if I'm in the setting that I have an FBI agent on the witness stand, or criminal defendant on the witness stand, right? Or go on and on and on. Those are people who kind of fit very different, a set of assumptions that we have. You know, it's just a helpful moment to have that space to think, okay, I've got these assumptions here, let's just notice them. I mean, maybe sometimes your assumption works out, you think it's right? Not because it's an assumption, but then it's established. And plenty of times it isn't. So I hope that came close to what you were wondering.
It definitely did. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Perhaps we could talk just a little bit about how you practiced class. How I, may I meet this moment fully? May I meet it as a friend? Diana, feel free to perhaps start with what you shared earlier, if you'd like to, because I thought it was quite brilliant and meaningful. But to talk for a few moments about that, I think that might be helpful because it's an instruction that's open-ended, right? And it offers the opportunity for each of us to find our own way into treating it as a friend, et cetera, welcoming it. But perhaps we can talk, and perhaps Chris, you can give us a little guidance.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you, Professor. When I was thinking about meeting a moment as a friend, I was kind of relating it to a gratitude practice, where you're in a situation where you don't like what's happening, and you maybe want it to be different, but instead of focusing, you sort of reframe your perspective to thinking about what you're grateful for in that moment, or how you could be grateful for that moment. And that was kind of how I was thinking about meeting the moment as a friend.
Yeah, I think it is very similar to a gratitude practice. And I'm thinking about that situation where the moment meets you, right? And I think it's particularly useful when it's a moment that we don't want, that we're resisting. And then we say, well, what about if I meet this as a friend? How does the body feel? I mean, to me, there's this settling. There's just literally like some release of tension when you meet it as a friend. And and I think that's the same thing that happens with gratitude. We can be so resisting, and then if we look for the gratitude, there's this relaxing, this opening.
It's so interesting to think about that in relation to the body sensations, because I'm thinking about how you'd feel if you're waiting in line at the airport and you don't know what's going to happen, and you're trying to get another flight and your body is like this. And you think about how maybe you're grateful that you'll be able to get a ride back home, that it's not a problem for you, or maybe you're grateful that like everyone's in the same situation, you're not being treated any differently, and try to like release that. That like tension.
I think of two other things that are kind of related to what you're saying too. Is it Diana?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. One is it kind of, for me, can open me up to, wait a minute, look at all these people around me. Everybody else in this line, just as much as I do, wants to get someplace. Everybody else in this line, you know, treasures their life the way I treasure mine. Everybody here, just whatever it is that I'm feeling, it's just kind of a shocker to open up my eyes and look around and go, oh yeah, they all want the same thing. So right then there's a relaxing, because it gets me outside of myself. And kind of a different thing is, I imagine being in that line, and I think of all the people who came together to make that moment possible, and my gratitude for them. So I'm in the airplane line. Okay, do we run what you could entertain yourself in that line for a long time, thinking about, all right, so the beginning of the earth, right? Humans were created, and then over time they learned, and then they figured out how to build things, and they figured out how to make planes fly. And then there's the people who, the farmers who were growing the food, that got the food right here in the snack that I'm eating. And right, it just goes on and on and on. And like we're standing on the shoulders of so many others. And it just takes my little tiny thinking about all I want is this and blows it open. And there's like awe, you know, so I can go from a teeny tiny mind to maybe having a taste of small. And again, it just gets me outside of myself.
I love that so much. That brought such a smile to my face as you articulated the latter. And the former, for those of you who are exploring mindful self-compassion, that shared humanity, a sense of shared humanity and how that's useful. And you spoke to that, and then you spoke to something that just blows it wide open. And thank you for that. You know, in the, let's say, 8 to 10 minutes that we have left, however you'd like to play it out, one thing I think that would be nice for a few minutes, or as long as you like, Chris, is if you would guide us in a practice, whatever it is that to you would be useful. We have learned in class the focused attention, breath awareness practice. We've learned the body scan. We've learned open monitoring. We've recently touched on loving kindness. I think that was last week that it was introduced. And so it's all wide open, and or anything else that might be on your mind. But I think for at least me, I think for the class, it would be nice to have you guide us in something if you're game.
Okay. I guess I would keep it simple right now, because I have a few things going on in my home that are a little distracting to me. It's interesting doing this, working from the dining table. But a practice that Scott mentioned, and it's great because it's just so simple, is one that this teacher Pema Chodron teaches. And if you haven't read Pema Chodron or listened to one of her books on Audible, I really commend her to you. She's such a simple speaker and so beautiful. And so from her, I got this practice, drop the story, feel the energy. And so I have mentioned it when I've talked with Scott and students before. I've actually taken breaks from the courtroom a couple times. Well, I've said, we're going to take a recess. And I go in my chambers and I'd sit down, and I'd do it when I'm really, like, my head's spinning. And it doesn't happen that often, but it happens sometimes. And the practice is, on the out breath for me, is I drop the story. I'm literally feeling a release. And on the in breath, it is feel the energy. So I find it very helpful in that moment when I'm very caught up in something. And I don't want to be. It's taking me away from the present. So the idea of dropping the story, it's just for an out breath, I could drop it. Now in the beginning, it's not easy to do. You might take a number of breaths, but I'm consciously aware that there is a story. And one of my favorite expressions I've learned from all this is don't believe everything you think. And just because I'm thinking it doesn't make it true, right? So there's this attachment to this story, and it is the truth, and I'm swept away. Drop it. And just practice doing it like that, drop it. And then on the in-breath, it's like a gathering up from the body, a gathering up from the earth. Feel the energy, because there's so much energy going on in the body when we're caught up in a story. And then, but it's, when you're really caught up in a story, it's hard to drop it. So out breath, drop it. And I don't say it as a command. Because if I command my brain to do something, it won't do it. It's an invitation. It's a suggestion, but I try to practice just doing it quickly, and it's possible, and then feel the energy. So it's bringing me back that there's a story, and then there's a body. There's a story, and there's just being present. And the nice thing about it is, you know, I could just take a minute and do it. And it can really like help me unhook from whatever I'm caught up in. So that's the practice, Scott.
Well, we all have, you know, what might be interesting is we can also, we don't have to we don't have to wait for something to be happening for the story to arise. We can even reflect on something that has happened for which we have a story. So, and in fact, compassion practices will often have it where we bring to mind something and have it take root in the body so that we can then work with it in a more skillful way, but, you know, being good to ourselves in terms of what we choose. So perhaps there's a way to have us, maybe for some of us, there's a story right now if we look around in terms of what's going on, because who knows what's going on in each of our respective homes and places where we are, let alone the circumstances of our life, or yesterday or the day before. So one thing, and then maybe you can give us, you know, 2 minutes of however much space or guidance to do that, or whatever formulation you might like. But one thing, because, you know, one thing we talk about in class a lot, and one of the sticking points I think that just persists endlessly, is wanting to do something to feel better, or do something to be more present, to do something. So drop the story, feel the energy, which I think is just fabulous for so many reasons. The drop the story, I love that you said, drop it, drop it. Like they used to have a dog, like drop it. They have, you know, they being a chicken bone, drop it, drop it. As a command, right? But you said that in order to even do it, you have to first be aware of the story. And I'm just curious if you might speak for just a minute and then use a minute or two to close with however you may wish with that. Is the awareness already what do you all, you know, a self-enforced order, or self-enforced, you know, self-enforcing, you know, whatever you issue that, where the parties, you know, it enforces itself at a certain point in time. Just the awareness and the dropping it is sort of happening as a result of the awareness, as well as the way we might nudge ourselves with a reminder.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole thing. You're just even thinking that you have a story. A lot of times we've got a story going on. It's the truth. It's the whole universe, right? We're caught up in it. And it's that stepping back to say, oh, there's a story. Now I'm going to drop it.
And is the dropping happening before you even say, now I'm going to drop it, by virtue of the awareness you're bringing to it?
It could. Sometimes I'm really attached to my story and I don't want to drop it, you know, I'm having a hard time. So I think you're right, Scott. Sometimes just thinking, oh, drop the story, feel the energy, boom, you're already feeling a difference, right? Because you'd have that awareness. And other times it might be, I have to really sit here and practice for a few minutes to let go of this because I'm so caught up in it. So what I would suggest is just for a moment, we could sit here and try to sit up as straight as we can and close our eyes. I think for most of us, that's a practice. I find that helpful. Looking at all of your faces would distract me right now. And I think the story doesn't even have to be a drama. The story can be simply what we're doing right now, right? We're sitting here on Zoom, talking to each other about this subject, and whatever permutations of that story each of us is having, right? And so the suggestion would be, with the out breath, to silently say, drop the story. So just having an awareness of whatever that story is, and seeing if it can let go. And there goes the teapot. And then breathing in and feeling the energy. Practice that while I turn off the teapot. Hold on. Okay, so the notion is that on the in-breath, that you just place your attention wherever it's most, where you're most able to do so, and just noticing energy in the body. The breath is always a great place to do that. You might notice energy elsewhere, perhaps in the hands, pulsing or tingling, or perhaps tension in parts of the body. Whatever energy you might feel, just simply notice it for the length of the in-breath, and then back with the out-breath. And I often shorten this to one word. So I use the word drop, and then I use the word feel. And I just silently continue with that practice. And there's really nothing to be achieved or accomplished here other than to try to be present with the letting go of the story, of the thought, and being aware of the physical sensations in the body. And if there's stories that you have about how you're not good at this, or it's hard to do, sometimes judgment arises, we note that with kindness. Oh, there's my opinions again. There's judgment. I'll drop that too. And we'll open our eyes. Very simple, but hopefully you might find it something useful to have in your toolbox. So thank you all for inviting me, and I wish you all ease and good health during these always, certainly always, especially in the next few weeks, couple months.
And to you, Chris, as well. Thank you. All righty. What a wonderful gift you've offered us, you've offered me. You all see how a judge can be, as you probably imagine, a really extraordinary judge on the bench, and also the wisdom and compassion is broader, right? And much of what you shared, as it always is, has helped and informed me and enriched my understanding of the study and practice, as Paul Singerman likes to say, of mindfulness. So thank you very much, Chris. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for taking the time.
You too. Goodbye, everybody.